Hi, in this video I want to show you how you can repeat columns and rows completely dynamically with PDF Butler. It will require Apex skills, so buckle up and let's go and take a look. So in this overview you would see that we have all the different lead sources here, and these lead sources we want to have as columns. And then for each lead we will actually want to indicate if it actually matches this lead source or which lead source it will match. We also have a counter here that we can say how many lead sources do we actually have per or leads do we have per lead source. So that's indeed repeating columns and repeating rows in the same table completely dynamically. So we have in our setup .config that has two data sources, and one data source will get the leads grouped by let's take a look at this data source. You can see that it's a group by, and it will get all the leads and the count of the leads grouped by the lead source. So if we run this query, we will see this overview, and that's exactly the columns that you see in my example. So that's the web, and the web has 6 leads, the phone inquiry that has 5 leads, and so on and so on. And that's what you can see over here in these columns. So that's our first data source. But then we have to create a second data source that will say, this is my lead, and this lead is of type purchase list. So in the purchase list column, I want to put a yes. And that's where we're gonna dig in and see how that can work. Let's start from the configuration and then work into the class that will reorganize the data to make sure that we can get a nice overview of each lead and the lead source it belongs to. In the configuration, you would see that we have two data sources. One is the lead source group by, and the other data source is actually what we call a key value data source. So a key value data source does not really have any data, but you can supply data into it via Apex. If you want to learn more about key value data sources, I would encourage you to check out our Academy, and on our Academy you can just search this item here, use Apex to add data sources, and that is full documentation as you would expect. So let's go back to the configuration. We would now expect our lead source that we already knew, we already seen that one, and then we're gonna supply data in this key value data source. We have this type here, so we're gonna create a config type, and the config type is gonna be of type complex column repeater. There is also a simple column repeater, as you can see over here. That one can just repeat columns, but it cannot repeat rows. So the complex column repeater is for repeating columns and rows. This data source is of course linked, this config type is of course linked to the data source lead source group by. So that's the one we have just seen, and that is then linked to a specific merge field. That brings me to the Word document that we're gonna have to create for this. In this Word document I have added a table, and in this table I have a first row that will just say, okay, this is the lead name. So if you go back into the generated document, you would see that this is indeed the name of the lead. We will see the configuration later on. And then we have the most important bit, and that's this thing over here, where we say this is the columns that we want to repeat. So this part over here, this is the column that we want to repeat, and what I made sure of is that the width of this column is fixed. So if we go back to the configuration, you would see that there is a question here. What do you want to do? So we're gonna add columns, and what we can do is two things. We can say the width of each column is gonna be the width of the column that we're gonna repeat, or we're gonna take the width of the original column and we're gonna divide it by the number of columns that we're gonna create. So in this case, we are gonna do that step. So what's gonna happen is that this width here, that's 10.84 centimeters or 10,84 centimeters, that will be divided into the amount of leads that we, or the lead sources that we actually have. Okay, so now we have created the configuration to repeat the rows. Now in that configuration you can add obviously some single config types, and the single config types will then be linked to the merge fields that you see over here, together with the data that it needs to take. So it needs to take the lead source, and it needs to take the count of the amount of records that it has for that lead source. So that was the data that was perfectly here coming from our data source. Okay, now that's the easy part, because we didn't have to do anything special with any data sources or anything. But now we're gonna also repeat the rows. So for that, we have to create a table row, and you have to make sure that in your configuration you first have the table column repeater and then the item to repeat the rows, the table row. If you have them mixed up, then it will first process all the table rows, and then obviously if you afterwards gonna repeat columns into it, the configuration will not work correctly. So make sure that you have the column repeater first and then the table row. Okay, in this table row, this is a normal table row, and we're gonna indicate that we want to loop over this data source. As I indicated, this is a key value data source, and now we're gonna see how we're gonna fill that data source with data. Before I dive into the code, let me show you what this step will actually do with the columns, or how it will repeat the columns. So let's go one time back to our Word document. So you saw that you had this one over here. You had the row call value. That's a merge field that is here. And in this merge field, we're gonna do something special when we are gonna loop through our column repeater. So our column repeater would replicate this column, would replicate a column for each lead source. So before it repeats the rows, it's gonna create a setup like this one over here. So it's gonna create all the columns that we need, but then you already see that this merge field is the normal one, but this merge field has _1, _2 and _3. So the table column repeater is gonna create these extra columns, and it's gonna call them, it's gonna make sure the merge field is unique by adding _1, _2 and _3 to it. Obviously, if you have more fields, it's gonna add _4, 5, 6 and so on and so on. Need to mention that the first column does not have _0 to it, so it's gonna be just the original merge field, just like that. Now, what is special here is that in the data source, this one is gonna look for the column called item, as you can see in the configuration. So in this configuration, we have this one over here, that it's gonna take a look at the item data source. But also very special is that the second column is gonna look for a field that will be named the same name as the field for the first column, but with _1, _2, _3 and so on and so on. So that's what we have to do specifically in the data source through Apex, making sure that these fields are named _1, _2 and so on and so on. So let's take a look at the code that I have prepared for this. Here you see the code. So this is gonna be a global class that implements an actionable from PDF Butler. In this case, I have used an before with data source actionable. That means that actually I can take data sources from PDF Butler. So these are the data sources we have seen, like this one over here. No, not this one, but this one over here. So that's the data source. We're gonna take that data. We don't have to write the query any again in the code. And that's what the before with data sources does. So it will run before the document is generated, but after the data sources are retrieved. Okay, so this is the interface. The interface is an execute method. I'll let you take a look at the documentation for that. But in this execute method, you will have a map with data sources, and you will fetch the data source with its unique identifier. So this unique identifier you can hard code, because actually it's going to be unique on all environments. So if you migrate the .config from development to testing to production, everywhere it will have this unique identifier. So if we're going to take a look at the data source, you won't see the identifier. If I'm going to take a look at all the data, show all the fields, there's going to be this one over here, the customer data source, and that one will have that identifier. So this identifier will always be set. Cool. So then I'm going to take a few steps here, so you can just copy paste these. I'm going to make sure you have the code, and then we have actually the lead sources. You would see that this is a list of map. For me, a map is a record. So one map is a record, and a list of map is of course multiple records. So going back to the data, that will mean that this one is a map, web and 6, that's the map, and then we have multiple rows, so that will be a list of maps. Okay, now what we need is a suffix. So we need to calculate or add a suffix to each field, if we like we have seen here, in our data source. So we're gonna have to add _1, _2, _3. So how you add that suffix, that's of course your problem as a developer, but here I can give an example. What I will do here is I will create a map, and in that map I will say, well, I'm gonna add the suffix to that map. So if I know the lead source of my lead, I know which suffix to add. So what we're gonna do here is we have all the lead sources, so that's these ones over here, and then I'm gonna loop through them. As you can see, I'm going to make a loop here, and I'm going to say, give me the lead source. That's going to be the key of our suffix map, and then the value is going to be the suffix that I want. As you can see, I have a counter here, and then when it's of course the first row, that's when the counter is 0. Then I don't want to put anything. There is no suffix there. Remember this Excel sheet where in the there was no suffix for the first column, so that's where I don't have any suffix. Now next up, now I have a map that I can easily get the suffix that I need to add. Now I'm gonna prepare my key value data source with data. Here we have taken an example that we don't always have to take data coming from a data source, but you can actually just write your own query. So here I have written a query on the leads that gets all the leads, and obviously gets the lead source field as well, because that's the field where we are grouping on. So next up, I'm going to loop through all the fields, and I'm going to create a record. Again, a record is a map. In this case, I have only string values, so text values. So that's why I have a map of a map of string and string. But you can also have maybe a map of string and an object. So maybe if you have decimals or numbers or currencies, checkboxes, whatever, booleans, so you might want to use a map of string and object instead of a map of string and string. Okay, but that's obviously all standard development. So now what I'm gonna create first is I'm gonna create in my map fields for each potential value. So I'm gonna create I'm gonna loop through all the suffixes, and then my suffixes will say I'm gonna create in my record, I'm gonna create the item field, and I'm gonna concatenate that with the suffix. So I have created 4 suffixes. So these suffixes that were created were empty, _1, _2, and _3. So these are the suffixes that I created. Now, when I would add the fields in my record, obviously the first one is going to be empty, so there's no suffix here, so it's just going to be called item, and then the second one will be item plus _1, so it's going to be item _1, and so on and so on. Now I have my fields. I also need the name of my lead, so I'm going to add the name field as well in my record, and then I'm going to override the actual field for my current lead source of my current lead with yes. So if I'm gonna get from the suffix map the suffix for the lead source, it's gonna return, for instance, _1. So it will say item _1 that I'm gonna add as a field, and then I'm gonna add yes there. Obviously, when every lead will be only linked to one lead source, so only one field will be overwritten, and thanks to this there will be some fields that are not overwritten and they will just be empty. A list of records is a list of maps, so that's why I have my lead list here, and I'm gonna add my lead item to the lead list. Cool, then I'm gonna take some steps to create to put it inside a PDF Butler list data source, and then I'm gonna add this list data source into the potential list of data sources that I have. Again, I'm gonna use the unique identifier here. So if I'm gonna take a look at my key value data source, you would see that this is this unique identifier for the key value. We have put it on the page layout. Why? Because obviously you're gonna need Apex to put data into a key value data source. Cool. So now this is the entire process. That's all that you have to do. And now what I have, let's take a look. I'm gonna run this data via the Butler inspector. If you don't have the Butler inspector, you can just search for it on our Academy, and it's a plugin for Chrome or Edge. And yeah, you can just install it, and that just makes it easy to do some tests. So in this case, I'm taking the .config leads column repeater. That's the .config that we are creating. And then I'm gonna click view data. So now it's gonna run the data sources. It's also gonna run all the before actionables, and in this actionable you can see now how the data was created. Let's maybe take a step back because I didn't show how I added the actionable. So on my .config you would see that I have one actionable, and this actionable is of type run class. I have added the class my actionable lead source column repeater. I have indicated that I want to run it before but after the data sources, and that it's active. Obviously, if you don't put it to active, it will not run and it will not create any data. If it has the wrong class, it will not run. If the class is not global, it will not run, and so on and so on. So these are the steps that you definitely have to take. If you're running it from a pack, obviously make sure that you also link the same .config to the pack. So, sorry, the actionable to the pack. Otherwise, it will only run from the .config. But if you need to run it from a pack, then also it needs this actionable on the pack. Cool. Let's go back to the data. I see my list of all the leads that I have, and I see that all the columns were created. Item, item _1, item _2. So that's all the columns that I expect. And then also I have added the word yes for each column that I have. In this case, I only put one field. Obviously, if you have multiple fields to handle, then don't make an issue here. Just add the fields that you want to add here as well. So you can put multiple fields here. Obviously, that's standard development, just doing the same thing, but then again and again. So I now have my data source. If I look back at my Excel file, now it knows that, hey, this for items is gonna be there, and then it's gonna map to this config type, merge fields that I have over here. So Now I have my data. Let's go back to the configuration. In my configuration, I had a table row that's gonna go over my key value data source. So that's the data source we have just populated through Apex. Then I have a normal single, that's for the name of my lead. So that's gonna be this column over here. And if I'm gonna take a look at my Word document, that's this row item over here. So that's this column. Okay. Then I have next to that also another config type, and this config type is of type single for table column repeater. That's important. If you would make this one a normal single, it would not know that it's linked to a column repeater, so it will just only do the first only replace this one over here, because that's the original merge field of that that was used towards that single, and that's why we have table single for table column repeater. Okay, so obviously it's gonna take the item, but you would think it's gonna take item underscore 1, item underscore 2. It will do that automatically because you don't know at forehand how many columns there will be. Maybe there will be 2, maybe there will be 3, depends on the data, obviously. So you can just do item over here, you can just put the merge field over here, and then you're gonna add which data source you used for multiplying the columns. So by linking this data source, it knows that it's gonna have 1, 2, 3, 4 records in there, and then it also knows that it's gonna have to add underscore 1, underscore 2, and underscore 3 to the merge fields and to the data fields in the data source. Okay. Oh. Let's go over here. So this is the configuration that is required. So as you can see, we have now a table row, a single to put in the name, and then we also a single for column repeater. Maybe one thing I want to show as well is how did we configure this key value data source. What we have done here is we have manually added the name and the item field. So we just said name, and then we added another field and we call that item here. So we just added these fields manually, and if you say okay, maybe I have a value and that's of type number or let's say currency, then you can just add these ones as well. So you can add the fields here that you would actually need in the configuration. But that's it, that's the entire setup. It's quite complex, so it will require your development skills and your insight skills, but yeah, if you do it correctly, it just works as is, and you can set it up yourself. Very important, what I always do is just use this Butler inspector here, that I click the button, view the data, that I can see that actually the data that I'm gonna use is set up correctly. So if this one does not show correctly, obviously it's gonna be incorrect data and you're not gonna get the result that you would like.